That's great. Okay. We are going to move on to the second sola, and that is sola secreto fidem. All issues of faith are private and personal. All issues of faith are private and personal. Now, it was brought to my attention that some were asking, well, what then is the definition of faith? Because we at least danced around, if I didn't say it explicitly, that faith is not the absence of knowledge, right? Faith is not the absence of evidence. You probably are familiar with those things, but that doesn't tell us what faith is. And it also, when we're talking about what faith is not, then sometimes it gets a little confusing because some of you immediately jump to, in your minds at least, Hebrews 11, was it 11:4, 11:6, where the writer, and we don't know who that person was, says, now faith, without faith it is impossible to please God. So I have had many a well-intentioned person bring that to my attention after a talk that I've given in a church because they assume I'm somehow saying faith is unimportant or unnecessary. I'm saying neither. But the book of Hebrews does not begin in the 4th verse of chapter 11. Does it? No. In fact, if you back up to verse 1 of Hebrews 11, the writer says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And what has the author done for 9.5, nearly 10 chapters prior leading up to chapter 11? What is the point of the book of Hebrews? Does anybody know? Jesus is better. Writing to a group of people who are considering abandoning Christianity and going back to Judaism because it was safe in very real ways. Nero didn't like Judaism, but it was not outlawed. Christianity was. And to lose your position as a Roman citizen was a big deal. To be declared persona non grata, or having no status in the 1st century AD, was a really bad thing to have happen to you. You now become a thing, not a person. So the author, for nearly 10.5 chapters, he or perhaps she even has some very applicable take-homes in the second half of chapter 10, but is arguing why Jesus is better. A better mediator, a better sacrifice, so on and so forth. So the author is giving reasons, and then comes to Hebrews 11:1 and says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So the author, in the NIV translation there at least, is saying that they assume that faith is substantive. It is evidentiary. There's something there. It's not mere belief. Belief and faith are not the same thing. But then clearly the verse says, but without faith it is impossible to please God. All right, so what does all of that mean? Well, we have to define what faith is, right? So a good definition for us of what faith is not going to be the same definition that the average college student is operating from. So when they say all issues of faith are private and personal, you could actually say faith/belief are private and personal. This is the idea where, again, it's very popular across the board that if you believe it, it must be true. That the truth teller is not the fact that the truth actually corresponds to the way things really are, but things become true depending on how ardently you believe them. This sounds familiar to you, does it not? This is everywhere. I mean, again, this is nearly every child's movie that's been produced in the past 25 years. It's the same theme over and over again. So what is faith then? Well, I can tell just by looking at you that you are people of faith. How do I know that? By looking at you. Making a simple visual observation. Are you? Well, your body's here. But are you here right now? And you go, there is an important game happening in about 2 minutes, right? Some of you are there, and I can't tell by looking at you, right? So just by looking at you, yes, physically you're here, but are you here? How do I know? By making a simple visual observation that you are people of faith. You're going to be so mad when you find out. What does that have to do with faith? How do I know that? Yeah, but how do I know? So you're saying that you have a belief that that chair is going to support your weight. How do I know that you believe that? How do I know that you actually believe that? You just said your whole weight is resting on it right now. Yep. All right. So let me give you, yeah, save it. So let me give you a very simple definition of faith. All right. Now this is not the end all be all, but it is a simple definition that you can at least work with. Okay. Faith can be defined as an actuated or activated belief. Faith can be defined as an actuated or activated belief. Very simple. Now, again, that's not the end-all, be-all. You do a word study on faith, you're probably going to come up with a lot more than that. But for our purposes, that's going to get us there. So, then is belief and faith the same thing? You're unwilling to commit because you feel like a shoe is going to drop? No, it's not. No, belief and faith are not the same thing. All right, so would you assume that in the greater Omaha area there are a bunch of people who believe in Santa Claus? Yep. Was Saint Nicholas of Romania an actual person? Yep, he was. He was actually at the Council of Nicaea. I was discussing this with someone on the break. You know, the Council of Nicaea was kind of a big deal. Do you know what he did at the Council of Nicaea? Literally, what St. Nicholas did there? He punched Arius in the face. Yeah, Arius the heretic, who was saying that Jesus wasn't really God. St. Nicholas had enough, and at the end, he got up, went over, and punched him in the face. So tell a story about that time Santa Claus punched a guy. I mean, that's pretty cool. All right? So he was an actual person. All right? But particularly there are children whose parents talk about Santa, and if you were to say to them, do you believe in Santa Claus? Even some parents would probably say, yes. I mean, have you seen the Polar Express? That's compelling, right? We have children in our house. We've seen it a lot of times. It's compelling. So is belief in Santa Claus rationally acceptable? Can a rational human being, do they have the right as rational human beings, and by the way, every human being is a rational human being unless they have some kind of disease or problem that has removed their rationality or has stymied it somehow. But on average, every human person is a rational human being, meaning they have the ability to make choices, correct? So is making the choice that there really is this person called Santa Claus with all the bells and whistles that go with it, is that rationally acceptable? Yes? Yep. I'm sorry? I wouldn't make that comparison because you just put Balaam's donkey in the same category as Santa Claus. I would not do that. One of those is historic. Well, actually, Santa Claus is historic. But so let me give you a rough equivalent then. This is horrible, and this is on the fly, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, fair enough. But to say, well, yeah, I mean, we believe in talking donkeys, ergo, donkey from Shrek is probably real. And I like to think of Balaam's donkey sounding like Donkey from Shrek. That's just me. Because I have an 8th grade imagination, that's why. But yeah, it's rational. And at a level, it is the same. It really is. However, beliefs are cheap. Real cheap. They're opinion cheap. They're Facebook evangelism cheap. Because and when I say evangelism, I don't just mean for the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean for whatever cause, people decide they're on that day. Every cause has an evangelist. Euangelion, where we get our word evangel from, is not only a Christian word. Caesar Augustus considered himself the good news of the ancient world after crushing what is now modern-day France. If you were an ancient Gaul, I don't know that you would consider Caesar Augustus your hero, but that's beside the point. But he called himself the good news, right? So they all have their evangelists. But what the belief then really becomes important when it's acted upon. So, if a person or persons say honestly, and they have the right to do this, they say, I really believe in Santa Claus, what are they not going to do the day after Thanksgiving? Yep. What are they going to do at home on Christmas Eve? That's right. We put out cookies and milk on July 3rd in my house for Captain America, but he's never come yet. They're going to do certain things, are they not? Or not do, depending on the situation. It's one thing to claim, oh, I have belief X, Y, and Z. Oh, yeah? Show me. Because without that demonstration, there is no faith. So, for me, when people say, Andy, because one of the things that I do, and we're kind of off script here a little bit, but this was brought up to me, and I thought it was important, so that's why we're talking about it. So this is all bonus material, okay? As I go out and give talks, one of the things that I give talks on, there's a whole series of things called rational arguments for the existence of God. You probably would know that better as general revelation. It's the same thing. And by the way, the Bible gives us permission to do that. Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The heavenly bodies actually tell us something about God, according to Psalm 19, right? That means at night, on a clear night, with not much ambient light, you should be able to go up, look outside, and know something about God just by observing the night sky. Think about that. If that's not enough for you, Romans 1:20. Some of God's divine nature, some of his hidden qualities can be seen in what has been made so that man is without excuse. Now, I grew up in a world and went to college in a place that told me that general revelation / natural theology, which is what we're talking about here, really isn't that big of a deal and just, okay, it's nice and all, but doesn't do anything for us. Hogwash. Of course it does, particularly in a post-Christian generation, where if I walk up to somebody and say, hey, Jesus loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, do I believe that Jesus loves people? Do I believe that Jesus has a plan? Yep, I sure do. Should I believe that the person I'm talking to has any concept of what I'm talking about? No. So, I give talks on the rational arguments for the existence of God. Or here's how I explain it to my students. There's like, well, you only believe in God, and you can only explain him or defend him by using your Bible. So how about this? I will defend the existence of God with my Bible tied behind my back. Now, an august group such as yourselves, some of you might have a little twinge of trepidation or perhaps even offense at what I just said. We'll go read Psalm 19 and Romans 1, and you tell me I can't do that? For instance, asking the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Well, the Bible says that God created it. Well, I know that. And I believe it, actually. because I have my reasons to believe why the Bible is a credible source of knowledge. But I don't need Genesis to argue that, because nothing plus nothing equals all. Like totally nothing or a little something besides a nothing. No, it's still nothing. So even if somebody is to say, well, I don't need the Bible, I don't need God to explain Big Bang cosmology, a dense ball of whatever, heated up to a certain temperature, exploded, expanded, and then we have the beginning of the universe. Which, FYI, ladies and gentlemen, that is a friend to Christianity. Why? Because I love to use this word because I don't get to use it very often. It actually describes the singularity. It describes the beginning of space-time. Before God spoke light into existence, was there time? No. Was there space? Is space a something? Yes. Space is a something. It's an empty something, but it's a something. Right? That's like, if you're taking notes, just write the numeral 0 on your paper right now. What do you have? A visual representation of nothing. But it's still something, isn't it? Okay, just saying. How many of your brains just melted just now? Yep. So, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So we can explain that there has to be God. And if you ever want, I'm happy to come back and talk about these things. There has to be God because it can't be aliens, because aliens are still bound by space, time, matter, and energy. Are they not? And anything that's bound by those things can't make them. Just common sense. Or the moral argument. How do we even have categories of right and wrong? One of the t-shirts we have back there, the brown one on the left, that's the philosophic table of worldview elements. Yes, that is a riff on the periodic table of worldview elements. That table's a lot easier to memorize because there's only 9 of them. There's 10 hexes, one just says worldview, and then there's 9. 9 fundamental questions that talk about all of life. We're told that the periodic table of elements explains all of reality to us. Really? Well, if you look at the periodic table of elements, is there anything that tells you what's good and evil? Just by studying the atomic number, why is gold more valuable than carbon? Based on the periodic table of elements. Why? It's not. In fact, do you need gold to survive? To be a person? A human person? Nope. You know what you need? Carbon. Dirt. Who says the noble gases get to be noble? I'm sorry, that's just dumb dad joke. It can't tell you. There's no categories in physics, chemistry, or biology that says good, evil. None. How do we even have those? Or there's another one called the fine-tuning argument, also known as the teleological argument. It says, why is there one planet, one, with the right tolerances and it's arranged and fine-tuned in such a way to support life? You realize if just one piece gets knocked out of whack, the whole thing will get destroyed. And there's nothing about physics, biology, or chemistry, cosmology for that matter, that says that the tolerances have to be that way on this planet. There's nothing that says they have to be that way. In fact, it would be a complete miracle if by chance it just happened. I mean, a huge miracle. And so my point is, in giving, I'm asked to give these talks, and I do, and I have very often had well-intended, good-hearted, God-fearing Christians come up to me and say, Andy, when you give us all these arguments, we no longer need faith. I'm sorry, how do you figure? Because if I'm going to be intellectually honest, like I've been trying to tell you that we need to be, you know what I know I could be? Wrong. I don't think I am. But faith is not merely believing something in the absence of knowledge. Faith is putting into practice what you know to be true, because if you don't, it is worthless. It has no value. Are you following me? My kids whom we adopted just a few years ago. They were our foster children, are only a year and 2 days apart, but they are polar opposites in their personalities. My daughter, who's going to turn 10 here in a few weeks, is fearless. She's reckless. Okay? When we take them to like the local pool, she doesn't realize that water can kill her. Because it can, right? Is water a wonderful thing? Can it kill you? Yes. How about fire? Is fire a wonderful thing? Yes. Should you play with it? No. Do men do it anyway? Yes. Right? My son, on the other hand, is a little more timid at the pool. Right? So if I bring my son to the local pool, and I'm in chest deep water, is a scenario that many of us are familiar with, and I'm saying, all right, come on, Sean, jump off the pool off the side of the pool into my arms. And if he is to do it, is that an act of faith on his part? Yes or no? Why? And he believes it, and so what is he doing with that belief? It's activated. Right? Could he be wrong? Sure. Could you be wrong that the chair is actually going to continue to support you through the session? Now you're all uncomfortable. No. When's the last time we tested these, Pastor? Right? They're not those flimsy plastic chairs that churches have. Never. These are Bertolini chairs. I can tell by looking at them. Right? That's the only company the church has ever used to get their chairs from. I know this to be a fact. But is Sean leaping into my arms, if he actually does it, is that an irrational leap of faith on his part? Does he have a good reason to believe that I'm going to catch him? Just based on what you know about me. Yes, I could be an ogre and be like, psych, sink or swim, kid. Right? I'm not. Because I don't want to frighten him nor have him drown. Neither one are good things. So him having a good reason to believe me and taking that step of faith, it's still a step of faith. Right? Now, the pushback that I get, it's like people are saying, I have proven God's existence. I have done no such thing. And what they're saying is related to what we're going to get into. So we're getting a little bit of ahead of the cart here, or horse, or whatever the analogy is. I just blew that. I'm sorry. So we're going to get into that here right after lunch. But it's this idea that the only things that they will act on in true knowledge are things that can be proven to be true. So, how many of you love the classic cinematic marvel known as Nacho Libre? Wonderful film. All right, thank you. So, what is Nacho's little buddy, Esteban? What does he say all the time? I believe in science. Right? And so Nacho's always trying to baptize him. You need to be baptized. Right? And Esteban says, I believe in science, and I have my students that will say that. Now, friends, is there anything wrong with science? How many of you this cold season have had to take an antibiotic because you've had bronchitis? Nobody? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in Nebraska. You're all hardy. Pardon me. Well, I know personally, if it weren't for modern medicine, I probably would be dead. I mean, I was a kid who had bronchitis or pneumonia every year as a kid. I was just sickly that way. I probably wouldn't have survived adolescence, right? I trust the pharmacy. So it's the idea. So faith. So someone who says, if I have reasons to believe what I believe, Andy, you actually are trying to prove it to be true. Absolutely not. Do you know proof is a very strong word? In fact, just like I don't use the word absolute anymore, I don't use the word proof anymore. Because there are very few things I can prove to be true. One of them is mathematics. That's one of the places you actually can use the word proof. And technically, that's about it. So here's what happens in my classroom when this conversation comes up. Because we talk about these things. And I can see it coming. So I'll have a student that kind of has a smirk on their face, and I'm like, oh, here it comes. And they'll say, so, Andy, you're a Christian, right? Yes, I told you that on the first day. So do you believe in God? And on the inside, I'm thinking, yeah, dummy, that kind of has to come first, right? It's hard to be a Christian and not believe in God. In fact, I haven't figured out how that works yet. So, but I, employ the filter and I smile my cheesy philosopher's grin. Why, yes, I do believe in God. Why do you ask? And they say, well, prove it. And like they have me. Oh, no. Now, you know what I say? With my big cheesy philosopher's grin? What do you think I say? I can't. I smile. And then they go from the cat toying with the mouse to now the sleigh stroke. Like they're going to just take me out in front of everybody. Aha! You see? You're just like all the other Bible thumper, holy roller, pew jumper, whatever. You just believe. I said, whoa, wait, hold on. You said proof. I assume you mean the word that you just said. You didn't ask me for evidence. Oh, well, like there's a difference? Yeah. And they will say, well, I only believe in things that I can prove to be true. And I'd say, that's absolutely not true. Absolutely, there's no way. No, I believe in science. Nacho Libre. So I only believe things, and this is a paraphrase, but what they're saying is, I only believe things that can be proven in a laboratory. No, you don't. And then I ask them a question, and this is going to come back to bite me. It hasn't yet, so I'm going to keep doing it. And I look at them and say, do you love your mother? And I'm happy to report every time I've asked that question, the response is in the affirmative. Of course I love my mother. Prove it. Go ahead, I'll wait. Oh, I clean up after myself. Well, congratulations. Welcome to young adulthood. I buy her flowers for special occasions. I send her cards. I call her. I have conversations with her. Yeah, you know what any of that proves? Nothing. Now, I'll agree with you that you just gave me really good pieces of evidence that clearly, logically lead to a conclusion that I would agree with you. You love your mother. But it proves nothing. Who was the 14th president of the United States? He's one of the few that got assassinated, but that helps. Abraham Lincoln. Do you know that Abraham Lincoln was this 14th president? I'm sorry, did I say 14th? 16th. 16th president of the United States. Do you know that? I do. Anybody know that? That Abraham Lincoln is the 16th president? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to trick you yet. 16th president of the United States, right? We know that. Kind of just common sense, even though I said the wrong, sorry, I said the wrong word. That wasn't intentional. Can you prove that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States? Nope. Nope. Well, what if I drive over to Springfield, Illinois, where I'm told he's buried? His remains are. Now, not me personally, but scientifically, is it possible that I could extract some DNA from those remains? Yes. I mean, I have just as much chance of doing that as making methamphetamine out of Sudafed that I have to buy with my ID at CVS. I'm like, this is really stupid because I don't know. I mean, I've seen Breaking Bad, but I don't know what to do with it. But I could extract some DNA, right? Okay, so then I could, however I'm going to store that DNA, I could then go to, and I've driven through Springfield, Illinois once. I have been to Washington, D.C. several times. In fact, I live right outside of it. I've been to Ford's Theater. I've been to the little museum in the basement of Ford's Theater. And in the little basement is some plexiglass cases, and in one of them is a pillow which appears to have what looks like to me as a blood stain on it. And I'm told this is the pillow upon which Abraham Lincoln died, being shot in or behind his left ear at John Wilkes Booth, according to the story. So, is it scientifically, technically possible for me to extract DNA from that blood sample? Yes. And would you assume that they would match? That's proof that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, right? No. What do I prove? A chemical match. That's all. Do those chemicals tell me who Abraham Lincoln was? Nope, no more than staring at the periodic table of elements tells me why gold is awesome. Or why helium gets to be a noble gas. Right? It doesn't explain it. So what then is the point of making rational arguments for the existence of God? Don't you want to know what you've hinged your entire existence on? Because if it's not actual knowledge, then the only thing that's going to be necessary to change your mind is a more interesting, compelling story. That's it. And it reduces objective reality to arbitrary belief. If all you need is just mere belief. I don't know about you, but I want to be a guy who's chasing down why I believe what I believe, because I want to be confident. Because my emotional, tenacious hanging on to what I believe, because I really believe deep down in my heart, I know is not going to carry the day. It's got to be something else. So no, faith is not the believing something in the absence of knowledge. It's not believing something in the absence of evidence. It is acting on what you believe to be true, and you actually have ways to have knowledge of what is true. So we can talk about that more later. Right now I'm trying to get it. Okay. So let's talk about faith being private and personal. First of all, there's this idea that belief is at its core illogical. That belief at its core is illogical. This is what allows for so many to say, hey, it's just what you believe, and it doesn't matter what everybody else believes, but you need to be true to yourself, blah, 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 blah. So what they're trying to do is eliminate the logical nature of belief. Let's talk about that for a minute. I spoke in a church recently, and I was giving an expository talk, so it wasn't just a talk generally about apologetic stuff like what we're doing here this weekend, but I gave an actual expository talk from 1 Timothy 6. And I gave the audience that I was speaking to some warnings about what college students face, and we're actually going to meet some of those people here in a few minutes. And I gave them a quick 15-minute rundown of the ideas of Nietzsche, Marx, and Darwin, which, by the way, are the three driving forces of just about every university or college on the planet. We'll talk about that a little bit later. A few weeks later, I got cornered by a man in the copier room of our church, which means I'm never going in there again because there's only one way in and one way out. And I got cornered by this guy who was a well-intentioned Christ follower, and he wasn't being mean to me. But he told me that in my talks, because I've spoken twice at our church. We've been attending there for 14 months. And they have plenty of pastors, so to get asked to preach is kind of like special. So I've been asked to preach twice. And he told me that he is concerned about me and my Christianity and my ministry because he said, I'm using man's logic, not God's logic. That's a serious indictment. Well, here's what I said to him. I said, before we continue any further with this conversation, you're going to have to tell me the difference. Does God have a different math than you? Nope. Now, for me saying that God is logical, do you think that I'm claiming that I can totally understand God? No. I don't. I still believe God is transcendent. He is holy, totally other. Yet I do understand that he has revealed himself to me through nature, through Israel, and through Jesus Christ, the Word. Right? Is all of that logical? Yep. And I said, sir, I'm sorry, you're wrong. God does not have a different logic than you. That would make him illogical, and that is not part of his character. Jesus is the Logos. Where we get our word logic from. But by us saying things like, well, we just believe what God says, we don't need man's logic, we're actually playing right into the hand of a millennial. Intellectual honesty. Get some. Feelings trump facts. One of the things I have to work very hard with my students is to get them in their papers not to say, I feel that, I don't care. I have a graphic somewhere that I throw up sometimes on PowerPoint in the classroom. It's like the parental advisories that come on music that the kids get sometimes because it's full of naughty words. Well, I have ones that says feelings advisory, facts don't care. So I'll let them know that. I tell them over and over again, I know you have been conditioned to lead with how you feel. I'm telling you, I don't care. Because your feelings have no causal power. Your feelings can't decide anything. Now, you can be driven by your feelings and they can influence your decision making, but you cannot make decisions with feelings alone. Impossible. And then the thing that you find here is a militant autonomy. How many of you have ever seen, I believe it's DreamWorks I don't think it's Pixar, I think it's DreamWorks. The DreamWorks film that came out a few years ago, Zootopia. But the bunny wants to become a predator, right? It's got Flash the Sloth who works at the Department of Motor Vehicles. He's my favorite, by the way. That was filmed in Scranton, I'm pretty sure. And at the end of the movie, they have like the animal rock star. Her name is Giselle, and she sings the theme song for the whole film. Try everything, because you get to become who you want to be. You are totally autonomous. Auto, alone. Autonomous. You are the master of your own destiny. You're the captain of your own fate. I told you, you've heard it all before in the public high school graduation. And these things don't erupt in a vacuum. There are thinkers, and I've resisted thus far this morning sharing too many proper names with you because I don't want it to get bogged down, but also I want to be us to be the generation of the church that understands where ideas have come from, because they don't just pop up out of nowhere. In fact, if you're taking notes, let me write down the name of. Please write down the name of a book that you might want to pick up. It's called The Cave and the Light by Arthur Herman. The Cave and the Light by Arthur Herman. I bought it on complete impulse at a Barnes & Noble a number of years ago. It is a layman's book on the philosophy, on the history of philosophy. Not the philosophy of history, that's a different thing. On the history of philosophy. And Herman, who is brilliant, argues that all philosophical schools of thought are either at their core related to the Greek philosopher Plato or the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Okay? And he walks through them. Oh, and by the way, except for one major difference, Christianity, which Jesus of Nazareth perfectly bridged the divide between Plato and Aristotle. If you're curious what that divide is, you come talk to me and I'll tell you. But this would be helpful. If you want to understand how people think, you got to be willing to dive into the world of ideas. So anyway, and you would meet some of these creatures and characters. First one is a character, not a creature. Soren Kierkegaard. He's on our bus. Early 19th century Danish thinker, and Kierkegaard has really gotten a bad rep from other Christians, including my heroes like Francis Schaeffer. I don't think Schaeffer quite understood what Kierkegaard was attempting to do, but the general basic overall understanding of Kierkegaard is that he was implying that true Christianity must involve a radical leap of faith that is illogical. And they get that from a book that he wrote called Fear and Trembling, which comes from Philippians chapter 2, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And in that book, in Fear and Trembling, the main character that he's talking about is the character of Abraham. And he's talking about Abraham being instructed by God to sacrifice Isaac. Now, because we have been conditioned by Sunday school, we've heard it so many times, we've probably lost the shock and awe of that whole story. Would you say that's fair? As I would. Until I went back and started thinking about it, like, whoa, wait. Isaac is the son of promise. How many decades did Abram and Sarai wait for Isaac? A long time. In fact, they waited so long, what did Abraham do at one point? Tried to kickstart the process. Well, actually, it was Sarah's idea. Hey, Hagar, come in here. Got a special job for you. Okay, right? Ishmael? And what did God say? Hello, I don't need your help. Yeah, I know, but come on already. This whole, sands of the seashore thing, we got to get going. All right, blammo. Here's Isaac. Well, that's one. That's a good start, I guess. Okay, now go kill him. What? And Abraham obeyed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Well, that's a total leap of faith. Yeah, if Abraham hadn't spoken to God before that day, he's out working in this field. Ding dong. Hey, Abraham. Yeah, what? Yeah, who are you? I'm God. Oh, cool. I have something for you to do. What? Go kill your kid. Okay. That's illogical. But this twisted, deranged idea about Kierkegaard has filtered into contemporary ideas regarding what faith is, and so the actual understanding that at its core, it must be illogical and certainly private. It's only between you and God. How many times have you been to a revival service? When I grew up, we had them 9 times a month in my church, and they lasted for a 12-day week. We bent space-time. And I can tell you how many times that we had the hot, fiery preacher who would, give the invitation and nobody's getting up. So how do they cover themselves? Well, that's okay. You can make a decision right there in your seat because it's just between hogwash. You show me anywhere in the Bible where fellowship, I don't like the word relationship because why? It's not used. Do you know, by nature alone, every person on the planet is in relationship with God? How do I dare say that? Creator, created. The only way for the relationship to go away is annihilation of one or the other. And we're told that neither is going to happen, correct? But it's a question of what kind of relationship? Fellowship, friendship, or enemy. Is not having someone as an enemy a type of relationship? Yep. Well, it's just between you and God. All right, really? How about you show me anywhere in the New Testament where these affairs are private? Are they personal? Sure they are. Not private. We got to be careful with how we use the language. Even if our intentions are good, ask God, am I speaking truth? Instead of making stuff up. Can I get on another hobby horse for a second? Would that be all right? And I don't know if this language is used here, but I hear it there's a couple churches that I know pretty well in Scranton, and they say this all the time. In fact, it is their mantra. They will say, it's not about religion, it's about relationship. Do you? Okay, I understand the sentiment there. I do. And if what we're saying is it's not about fulfilling an Old Testament list or something, I get it. I really do. But again, a relationship is not a New Testament word. Religion is. But what does that word mean? What does the word religio, comes from the Latin word religio, what does it mean? Any idea? It means obligation. Now, here's the mind-blowing shocking reality of Christianity. It takes the religio idea of obligation and it blows it out of the water. Totally blows it up. Think about cult worship, just anything that you know about it, right? The Roman, Greek, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Egyptian, right? They're all basically the same. Oh, and by the way, we have them being rehashed for us on the big screen again today. Do you know what they are? DC Comics and the Marvel Universe. Tony Stark is Zeus. He made an element in Iron Man 2. How do you create an element unless you're God? I mean, DC Comics, that's really easy to figure out. Aquaman is Poseidon. Wonder Woman is Athena. I'm pretty sure Batman is Hades. I'm up for a debate on that one. I'm pretty sure Batman is Hades. I'm Batman. I'm Hades. I could just hear it in his voice from the Christian Bale days. Anyway, in all those ancient cult religions, what was the obligation for? It was to get the gods to like you, or at least not zap you. And it was a complete wild guess. If you want a story that deals with that, read Homer's Iliad. The gods don't reveal themselves to man. In fact, man, the overall theme of man in the Iliad is that he knows that he is the plaything of the gods, if not just merely their personal battlefield. They don't know what the gods want. That's why they sacrifice crazy amounts of cattle and do all kinds of stuff in just hopes that today we're going to get their attention and they're going to like us. But in order for the gods to accept man, what did they have to do first? Man. Their obligation. What does Christianity say? Christianity say that? No. Not at all. It says that God, instead of not telling us what he wants and making us guess, has told us exactly what we need to know and was so concerned about it that the Word became flesh. He is among us. John 1. So, do Christians have obligations? Anybody want to dare to answer that question? Do you have an obligation to love me if we're both sons of the King? Do I have an obligation to love you? Do you have an obligation to your wife as a son of the King? There's two. Do I have an obligation to show mercy? Do I have an obligation to live justly? Do I have an obligation to my local body, my church? Again, that's not a New Testament language either. Nobody said my church or for going to church. Because they understood that that's what they were. But we have obligations, do we not? We have obligations. The difference is we perform the obligations after redemption, not as a prelude to it. But again, I understand the context. That's good. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Like, difference between I'm making decisions because within that conversation, we as sons and daughters of the King, we have a modicum of personal freedom to decide who, what, where, when, and how, right? For instance, my dad has made some significant decisions about how he's going to live his life. I've never seen him in a pair of shorts. Never seen my dad in a pair of shorts. I don't know why I made that decision, but he did. When I never was allowed to go to the movies growing up. I wasn't allowed to go to the theater. I do now, and I love it. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get Dad to change his mind on this one. When the Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe came out, that was brilliant. It was well done. It was well done. And so, I might be an old guy, but I still know how to work it. Start with Mom, right? Get Mom on board, and then you have an undivided front, right? So I said, "Hey, Mom, we'd really like to take you and Dad to see it. It's great. We saw it. It's beautiful. It'll make you cry and laugh and make your heart sing. It was just really well done." And she said, "Well, I'll go if you can get your father to go." Okay. Yeah. So I went to my dad, and I said the same thing, and my dad very simply said, "Andy, I made the decision not to go to the movies when I became a Christian as a teenager, and I don't see any reason to change my mind now." Is that being a Pharisee? No. He has the freedom to make that decision, does he not? Now, if he were to say, and everybody needs to follow the same, that is Pharisaical. Right? But he's not. And he never has told me, you have no right to do that. He said, of course you have a right to do that. I don't want to. Okay. All right. They did try to watch Lord of the Rings at home one time. That didn't go well. So we're not going to do that again. Friedrich Nietzsche. One of the reasons that faith needs to be privatized in the 21st century is because of the great walrus. Look at that stash. I mean, he could filter kelp with that thing. Friedrich Nietzsche. He would say that religion and people like us, you're giving up a Saturday, and many of you are giving up a great football game right now to be here. You're giving these things up because you're weak, you're slaves, you're sheep, you're plebeians, not patricians. Your herd mentality, and that's why you're here. Actually, Kierkegaard actually said the same thing. He said, what we have is a herd mentality, and we need some people who are going to dare to think. So they're actually talking about the same thing from radically different sides of the same coin. But Nietzsche said that for those of us who are here because we're so weak that we are stuck in the cave of lies and shadow, and we don't understand reality for how it really is. That is why so many of our students, when they get to college, they feel like they have to maintain a private faith. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all that some of us here who have sent kids off to college or know Christian kids who go off to college will say something like, we just hope they maintain their faith in God. Now, do I want students to maintain their faith in God when they go to college? You bet. Is that my highest goal? No. Because you know what? You can maintain a private faith in anything as long as you keep your mouth shut. Maybe you're really not a Cornhuskers fan. Like Penn State. Or Ohio, or Wisconsin, or I don't know. Whoever the horde, whatever would be just heretical to love besides the Cornhuskers. Iowa, maybe, I don't know. Anyone. All right. Anyone. Well, you can maintain a private faith in that sports program, can you not? By keeping your mouth shut. You ever think about 4 young Jewish boys who were forced to enroll at the University of Babylon? What were their names? I'm sorry, what were their Hebrew names? Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Not Rakshak and Benny. And Belzi, I guess they would call. Since Daniel wrote it, he could refer to himself as Daniel. Did they maintain a private faith in God? What did they do? They maintained a high-profile public witness for God in a hostile environment. Daniel, 2 world empires. Babylon, Persia. Amazing. Risked their lives over and over. Nietzsche would say they're fools. And unfortunately, Nietzsche has won the day. And then there's by the way, all three of these guys would be considered existentialist thinkers. They're in the school of existentialism. Albert Camus, you can see when he died, 1960, died tragically in a car accident. He has written several works of fiction, and I've read just about everything that he has written, and it was hard. But I'm really trying to understand existentialism. But he would say that nothing really matters. The only thing that matters is whatever you decide. And as long as you decide and you honestly live out your truth, that is what gives life meaning. Think about all the adventure stories that are out there. This is one of the themes that comes up again in TV shows and movies and books and stuff, and I happen to like them. And the spiritual aspect or the metaphysical aspect of these films that will say things like, to find your way to the top, you cannot follow a guide or you cannot follow a path that already leads to the top. You must find your own way. That is authentic. Is that even close to biblical? No. Back in the thing I skipped over in the first session, those passages from 1 John, John says, whoever claims to be in him must live as Jesus did. Well, that just means that Jesus was nice to everybody, right? No. John tells us what that means. A little earlier than that, in chapter 1, he said, this is how Jesus lived. He lived his life fully exposed in the light of the Father. Did Jesus bend the knee to anyone? Yep. Who? The Father. Not my will. That was a trick. I'm sorry. That was a dirty trick. It was a dirty trick. Did Jesus follow his own path? And that's just a sampling. Let me give you a contemporary example. A few years ago, as a husband, I had to face something that was very scary. My wife and I had an evening to ourselves, and I was tasked with going to the Red Box and finding a film that we're both going to like. Now, this was a little before streaming everything digitally. We still were so pedestrian that we'd have to go to the Red Box and rent something. The only other thing that brings me more fear and trepidation is because I don't have any hair really to be concerned about. If we're going out, I'm ready to go hours before. My wife is upstairs cosmetologizing, arranging things, and I get that horrid summons men that send shivers down your spine. Honey, could you get X out of my purse? Where is it? It's in the front pocket. Like there's only one. Right? And how do you know? Is there a front and back? Is there a label? It's not like a t-shirt. You can't tell front and back. I don't know about you all, but I don't go into my wife's purse without rescue flares, food, two-way communications, repelling gear. It scares me. So off I go to the Red Box, and I discovered that they had a copy of this movie that I always wanted to see. It's called Everest. Anybody seen this? What'd you think? You like it? It's compelling, right? Anybody over here? The cheap seats? You guys see this? No? Okay. I liked it. And I wanted to see it, and I thought, oh my, manly men climbing Mount Everest. This is good. I mean, I like that. You probably will too. So I brought it home, and lo and behold, I was right. So you may hoist your compliments upon me because I got this one right. And I was fascinated with the story that was happening. Now, if you haven't seen Everest, you probably should know this going in, as most people do. It involves a disaster. I think it was 1996. is when the actual events took place. And during the climbing season of 1996, and the season to summit Everest is only about 6 to 8 weeks long every year, a freak blizzard blew up the mountain, and 11 people died in the period of about 2 or 3 days. And up until 1996, it was the worst single disaster on Everest. Now, there have been worse ones since involving earthquakes, but at the time, it was horrible. And so this is an eyewitness account. So after I read the story, or after I saw the movie, I went out the very next day and I bought the book by Jon Krakauer, Into Thin Air. His character is portrayed in the film. And I read Into Thin Air, and I read another book called Left for Dead, written by Beck Weathers, the doctor, remember? Who is a very small, diminutive man. And he's trying to prove himself. And this guy, Beck Weathers, didn't die. He wrote the book, but he didn't personally write it down because he lost both of his hands, and his nose, and a good portion of his face. I mean, he'll never be the same due to extreme frostbite. So I'm reading this book because I'm fascinated by this stuff. I'm fascinated by these adventure stories. Why? Because there's something involved that speaks about faith. Every time. My father-in-law, who's recovering from a stroke, we went to visit him in the nursing facility where he was. Thank God he's home now. And I happened to pick up a copy of Outside Magazine. And in Outside Magazine, which, by the way, Jon Krakauer writes for, and in Outside Magazine, they had their 2 lead stories. One was a story about this young Christian missionary who went to some island, group of islands off the coast of India somewhere. I'd never heard of these things before, but he was driven to go share the gospel with completely unreached people groups, and he is dead today. And the article wasn't totally bashing him, but it basically made it look like he was a lunatic believing that he had any right, responsibility, or reason to do that. There's other articles about people who are skiing across the South Pole alone, and they're celebrated. Or there's another article about this guy who is, this person who's a transgender ski person who loves to do tricks and goes out and skis in high-heeled boots. And they have pictures, and he's got his trail name and then his real name, and they're just celebrating that. So, I'm reading the story. And I'm reading that Jon Krakauer, that's actually Jon Krakauer, not the actor that played him, that's Jon Krakauer. Jon Krakauer writes freelance for things like Outside Magazine and Backpacker and stuff like that. And there are these commercial climbing outfits that will take $75,000 to $100,000 of your money with the agreement that they're going to get you to the top of Everest and back safely. Now, think about it. Even if you're not into mountain climbing, could you top that? Like at the next party, hey, what did you do this summer? Oh, I drove to California. Oh yeah, I summited Everest. I'm like, you can't beat that, right? And by the way, climbing Everest requires very little technical mountain climbing knowledge. It's a very long, hard uphill walk. You have to do some mountain climbing, but it's not technical mountain climbing. So Krakauer in the book writes how all these climbing outfits wanted him to go with them. And he talks about another character that is in the story, Scott Fisher, played by Jake Gyllenhaal in the movie. And Scott Fisher owns a climbing outfit called Mountain Madness, based out of Seattle, which is where Krakauer lives in the Pacific Northwest. And he tells about in the book how he had a chance encounter with Scott Fisher. They ran into each other at a social engagement, and Scott Fisher was begging Krakauer to go with him because they all wanted him to write these great pieces that are going to get published in things like Outside and Backpacker, because those are the kind of people that are going to go climb Everest. And so he's begging Krakauer to go, and Krakauer says to him, Scott, I don't know that I can do this, even though I have real technical mountain climbing experience, and he does. But he said, Scott, I've never been above 18,000 feet. I've never climbed using supplemental oxygen. And John Krakauer knew that base camp, where you start to summit Mount Everest, is 19,000 feet. The summit of Mount Everest is the altitude of the average Boeing 747, about 34,000 feet. You can't survive at that altitude. He said, no, I don't think I can do this. And he said in the book that Scott Fisher responded, not the altitude, it's your attitude, bro. Now, I'll admit, if you decide that you want to try to summit Mount Everest and you try climbing that mountain with a bad attitude, you know, a poopy diaper, you're probably going to die. If you have a bad attitude, you're probably not going to survive. It's good to have a little good attitude, but what did John Krakauer know? He knew that his attitude would do nothing to change the effects of high altitude pulmonary edema. HAPE, H-A-P-E, the number one way people die on Everest, for their lungs filling up with fluid. Or high altitude cranial edema, his brain pan filling up with fluid. Not to mention frostbite, hypothermia, not getting enough fluids. John Krakauer, because he was an experienced mountain climber, knows what happens when you get into that altitude. You got to go up there a little beefy because you can't process calories anymore. Your body starts feeding on itself. If all of us got dropped on Mount Everest right now, we would all be dead. Nobody would make it down, and there's a few different ways that you would die, not to mention falling. That's a good way. It's way up there. And there are some faces that are 9,000 feet sheer drops. You're going to die of one of those three things. We're not acclimatized to that kind of altitude, not even close. They spend weeks going up and coming back to get their bodies ready. But he knew having an attitude, the right attitude, or believing, having this personal deep down belief that it was all going to be okay, would not make it. Scott Fisher's body is still on Mount Everest today. Visible, as most of them are, because they're well preserved in the deep cold, and their bright colored parkas are very easily seen. Here's a literary example from the Screwtape Letters. Screwtape is writing to Wormwood, and he says, and all the time the joke is that the word mine in its fully possessive sense cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. Now, if you don't know what the Screwtape Letters are, don't read ahead. Let me explain it to you. This is a classic C.S. Lewis text that you can read in easily 1 or 2 sittings. It's his imagination of this senior demon, Screwtape, writing letters of instruction and encouragement to his young nephew, Wormwood, who is a junior tempter. And Wormwood has been assigned to a man simply called the Patient. You never know his name. And the events of this book take place during the Blitz of World War II, where the Germans were bombing London night after night. And so that's when it's taking place. And so he's telling him how he needs to be a good tempter. So anyway, back to the quote. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine is, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. Think about it for a minute. In the long run, either our Father, that's Satan, or the enemy, that's God, will say mine of each thing that exists, and specially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to who their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Because we, many times, are helping our young college students, the millennials and Gen Zers among us, to use that possessive mind as if we or they actually really own anything. Whose is it? God's. Well, according to Screwtape, it's either God's on the pedantic grounds that he actually made it, or the more realistic grounds of Satan conquering it. Well, he's right. We need to be careful how we use that term. All right, let's take a break for lunch.